The storm clouds loomed heavy in the night sky as Flight 217 prepared for takeoff from a remote airport in Alaska. The plane, a mid-sized passenger jet, carried 137 passengers and 6 crew members, all eager to leave the freezing winds behind. Among the passengers were families, business travelers, and a young woman named Clara, who was flying to reunite with her fiancé. As the plane ascended, the turbulence began almost immediately. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, assuring everyone it was just a routine patch of rough weather. The passengers exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke of their growing unease. 2 hours into the flight, the plane hit a particularly violent jolt, causing drinks to spill and overhead bins to rattle open. The lights flickered for a moment before stabilizing. Clara clutched her seat's armrest, her knuckles white. She turned to the elderly man beside her, who offered a reassuring smile. "Planes are built for this," he said. But his voice faltered when the lights flickered again and went out entirely, plunging the cabin into darkness. The emergency lights blinked on, casting an eerie red glow over the passengers. Whispers of confusion turned into panicked murmurs as the plane shuddered violently. A loud metallic groan echoed through the fuselage as though the plane itself were crying out in pain. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, but this time it was strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing—" His words were cut off by static. Then, the strangest thing happened. The windows, which had been streaked with rain and fog, began to clear. Passengers pressed their faces to the glass, expecting to see the stormy skies. Instead, they were greeted by an impossible sight, a vast, black void, dotted with faint, glowing orbs. It was as though the plane were flying through space. "What the hell is that?" someone shouted. Panic erupted in the cabin. The flight attendants, visibly shaken, attempted to calm the passengers, but their reassurances sounded hollow. Clara felt a chill run down her spine as she glanced at her reflection in the window. For a split second, she thought she saw another face staring back at her, a pale, gaunt face with hollow eyes. She recoiled, her breath quickening. "Did you see that?" she asked the man beside her, but he was staring straight ahead, unblinking. His lips moved as though he were speaking, but no sound came out. The cabin began to change. The red emergency lights flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows. The air grew cold, so cold that passengers' breaths became visible. And then, one by one, people began to scream. At first, Clara couldn't see what was happening. Passengers in the middle rows stood up, pointing and shouting at something in the aisle. When she craned her neck to look, her blood turned to ice. A figure was walking slowly down the aisle. It was tall and impossibly thin, with long, spindly limbs that seemed to stretch and contract as it moved. Its face was featureless except for a wide, gaping mouth that emitted a low, guttural hum. Wherever it passed, the overhead lights dimmed, and the passengers it approached froze in place, their eyes wide and unseeing. Clara fumbled with her seatbelt, her fingers trembling. She needed to move, to do something, but her body felt paralyzed with fear. The figure turned its head toward her, its empty gaze locking onto hers. It began to move faster, its long legs covering the distance between them in seconds. Just as it reached her row, the plane lurched violently, throwing Clara against the window. The impact snapped her out of her paralysis, and she scrambled into the aisle, dodging the frozen passengers. She ran toward the back of the plane, her heart pounding. Behind her, she could hear the creature's unnatural movements, its limbs scraping against the walls. In the rear galley, she found a flight attendant huddled on the floor, clutching a crucifix and muttering prayers under her breath. "What is that thing?" Clara demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. The flight attendant looked up, her eyes wide with terror. "It's not supposed to be here," she said. "It only comes when—" Her words trailed off as the galley door creaked open. The figure stood in the doorway, its head tilting unnaturally as it observed them. Clara grabbed a metal serving tray and hurled it at the creature. It passed through the figure as though it were made of smoke. The creature stepped closer, its gaping mouth opening wider, emitting a sound that was both a scream and a roar. Clara and the flight attendant backed into a corner, their escape cut off. Just as the creature reached for them, the plane shuddered again, and a blinding light filled the cabin. Clara felt a sudden weightlessness, as though she were floating. The sound of the creature's roar faded into silence. When Clara opened her eyes, she was lying on the floor of the galley. The red emergency lights were gone, replaced by the normal cabin lighting. She stood up, her legs shaky, and looked around. The passengers were all in their seats, asleep or staring blankly ahead. The creature was gone. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the turbulence. We'll be landing shortly." Clara stumbled back to her seat, her mind racing. As the plane descended, she glanced out the window. Below her was an unfamiliar city, its streets empty and shrouded in fog. When the plane touched down, no one moved to disembark. The passengers sat in eerie silence, their faces devoid of emotion. Clara grabbed her bag and hurried to the exit. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, she turned back for one last look at the plane. Through the cockpit window, she saw the captain, his face pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes staring straight ahead. She never saw the other passengers again. And she never found out where Flight 217 had landed. But every night, she dreams of the creature and its haunting, hollow gaze, and she wakes with the sound of its roar echoing in her ears.